Hi, my name is Celestine. I lived in the house my father built, brick by brick, with his hands, his back, his blood, but that didn't stop my sister from stealing it, or her husband from slamming the deed into my chest, screaming, "Sign it or die on this floor." And when I fell, bleeding, trembling, my sister didn't flinch. She looked me in the eye and said, "You are just a debt." How did it come to this? How does family become the weapon? And home, the battlefield? Would you stay if every room whispered you didn't belong? It was just past 6 when the light over the kitchen sink flickered one last time and went out, leaving only the faint orange glow from the hallway to spill across the cracked linoleum floor. I stood there, half in shadow, still holding a dish towel in my hand. The sink was full again. I hadn't even gotten halfway through the dinner cleanup when Derek came storming in. His boots hit the floor like gunshots, each step louder than the last. I didn't need to turn around to know he'd been drinking. The thick scent of bourbon preceded him like a warning. Without a word, he slammed a thick folder onto the table, papers spilling out, some already creased, some still damp from what I hoped was condensation off the bottle he was probably hiding in his coat pocket. I turned slowly. My stomach dropped. "You know what this is," he growled, voice low but sharp like rusted wire. "Sign it." I didn't move. He stepped closer, too close, and grabbed one of the pages, wadding it into a ball before shoving it hard against my chest. I stumbled back a little, not from the strength of the blow, but from the jolt of betrayal that traveled faster than his shove. "Sign it," he hissed again, louder this time, "or die on this floor." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The paper, sharp where it bent, scraped my collarbone as it crinkled beneath his knuckles. I could feel my heart pounding, not out of fear, not yet, but something worse, recognition. I had seen this moment coming for years. Behind him, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed and that same cold look she'd worn since the day she married him, stood my sister. Isolde. Her lips barely moved when she spoke, but her voice was a dagger dipped in ice. "You are just a debt." Just a debt. Not her sister. Not the girl she used to sneak out with to climb onto the garage roof and watch fireflies. Not the kid she once whispered dreams to in the dark about getting out, building a life with sunshine, yellow curtains, and a dog named Tucker. Just a debt. I blinked hard. Not from tears. I'd stopped wasting those on her a long time ago. But to push away the memory of our childhood bedroom, the one we shared for 15 years, now completely replaced by legal documents and broken loyalties. "You're not gonna guilt us with your little sad face, Celestine," Isolde said with a shrug. "You live here for free. You contribute nothing. This house isn't yours." My voice trembled but came out steady. "This house was Dad's." Derek laughed. It was short, ugly. "Your dad's gone," he snapped. "He didn't leave it to you. Hell, he barely left anything behind, except a mortgage and a mouth to feed. We've been carrying you for years. It's time you carried your weight, or get out." I felt the edge of the counter against my back as he stepped in again. The tile floor cold through my socks. The paper now crumpled on the ground between us. "You think this place is your shrine or something?" he spat. "It's a pile of bricks. It's a liability." "No," I said quietly, shaking my head. "It's the only home I've ever had." Derek's face twisted. "Then sign it and walk away with your pride." But I couldn't. I wouldn't. When I didn't reach for the pen he shoved at me, he snapped. One hand grabbed my wrist, the other pushed me back against the counter hard enough to knock a dish from the drying rack. It shattered on the floor. The noise echoed through the kitchen, through my bones. His grip tightened. "You think you're smart?" he sneered. "A smart woman knows when she's lost." I looked up at him, face inches from mine, and whispered, "A smart woman remembers what's hers." That was when his hand flew. My cheek stung instantly. I tasted blood. My knees gave way and I fell, hard, my shoulder slamming into the edge of the cabinet on the way down. The papers fluttered beside me like fallen birds. I could hear the blood drip onto the tile. Tap, tap, tap. Slow and steady. Derek loomed above, breathing heavy, chest heaving. Behind him, Isolde didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't help. "I collapse," I whispered through gritted teeth. but not to give up. He reached down again, maybe to grab the pen, maybe to yank me up by the hair. I didn't know. I crawled backward, one hand pressing to my cheek, the other reaching for the documents. I clutched them to my chest like a child would a blanket in a nightmare. "You don't own this house," I breathed. "You don't own me." Isolde finally moved, walking closer, eyes sharp. "You're not worth the taxes," she said. "Better a for sale sign on the lawn than your name on the mailbox." I stared at her, at the person who used to braid my hair, who once promised me that we'd always choose each other, no matter who came into our lives. Now she was choosing him. Over me, over everything. Outside, the sound of barking, a dog. Then, brakes screeching. Derek turned toward the noise. I stayed down, chest heaving, still holding the deed. "Let go," he snarled. "No." He bent down again. I kicked at him, not hard, but enough to throw him off balance for a second. That second was all I needed. I scrambled toward the base of the kitchen island, pulling myself up by the edge, shaking. My vision blurred at the edges, my ears buzzed, voices. Outside, a neighbor yelling, footsteps on the porch. Derek cursed under his breath. "Enough," he hissed. He lunged, and just as I thought my body would give out, a pounding thundered against the front door. The knocking faded into my memory like the end of a thunderstorm, loud and sudden, then gone, leaving only the quiet damage behind. But long before fists ever landed or papers ever tore, there were other signs. Small ones. They came not with slammed doors, but with quiet glances, altered documents, and the unmistakable feeling of being erased. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. The sun filtered through the curtains above the kitchen sink, casting yellowed light across the table where bills and old boxes sat untouched. I'd been clearing space to prep dinner when I saw it. Dad's old cedar lockbox. It hadn't been moved in years. The latch was rusted, the edges worn soft from use. I don't even remember bringing it upstairs after the basement flooded, but there it was, tucked behind a crate of holiday ornaments no one had touched since Mom stopped decorating. I opened the box without much thought, just curiosity at first. Inside were old family photos, receipts from the hardware store where Dad used to get supplies, and at the very bottom, folded carefully, his will. The real one. I unfolded it slowly, cautiously, as though it might dissolve in my hands. The paper was soft from age, the ink faded but legible. His handwriting, blocky, practical, marked my name next to the line. Co-heir to the Carter family home. My name, Celestine Marie Carter. He had included me. I felt the breath hitch in my chest. Because the version Derek and Isolde had waved in my face during their legal conversation just weeks earlier didn't have my name. I remembered the cold certainty of it. Isolde saying, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. He never intended it for you." I had believed her. Not because it sounded like Dad, but because I wanted to believe she wouldn't lie about something that big, about something ours. But she had. They both had. I sat down at the table, legs weak. The paper trembled slightly in my grip as I reread it, line by line. The words weren't fancy. Nothing in Dad's world ever was. But they were clear, fair, final. How long had they known? How long had they planned this? That night, after dinner, I found myself standing outside Mom's room. She was in bed already, propped up with 2 pillows, her eyes half-lidded from the medication Derek insisted she needed to stay calm. I walked in slowly, the will folded inside my sweater pocket. I didn't plan to show her, not yet. But I needed something, a sign, a flicker of the woman who used to polish these very floors on her knees every Saturday morning. Her fingers twitched under the covers. I reached for her hand. It felt cold, too still. "Mom?" I whispered. She stirred, barely. Her eyes opened just enough to focus on me. For a moment, I thought I saw something, regret maybe, or shame. But it passed quickly. I didn't ask about the papers. I asked about the house. "Did you know what you were signing?" I said gently. "When they had you transfer it over?" She blinked slowly. "I signed what they told me to," she whispered. "That house was Dad's. He left it to me too. I found the will. Her lip trembled. Not from emotion. I wasn't sure she could even feel much anymore, but from how weak she'd become. Forgive me, she breathed. I didn't read it. I just wanted peace. It hit me like cold water. They'd cornered her when she was too tired to fight, and she had let them. A few nights later, I found the small recorder. It was tucked in my top drawer, inside an old jewelry box I hadn't touched in years. I almost didn't notice it. When I played it, her voice came through faint and crackly. I signed without knowing. Forgive me, Celestine. The house should be yours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on the edge of my bed, holding that tiny machine in my hand, and felt the weight of knowing. Not just that I had been betrayed, but that I had been silenced by people I trusted more than anyone. That this house, the only thing left that still felt like a part of Dad, had been weaponized against me. People think betrayal always shows up loud, shouting matches, slammed doors, drawn-out speeches with teary eyes. They're wrong. Sometimes it comes in the form of a signature, a nod, a shrug. Sometimes betrayal is silent. I slid the will back into its envelope and kept it hidden in my coat pocket, close to my body like armor. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't letting go of it again. That afternoon, I made myself a cup of tea, sat at the dining table, and looked around. At the chipped corners of the cabinet, the wallpaper Mom picked out when Isolde was born. The spot on the floor where Dad used to kick his boots off after a long day. This house was mine, not because of a piece of paper, but because every inch of it held our memories, my memories, and I would not let them steal those too. The house creaked around me, not from ghosts or storms, but from time, from the weight of too many secrets carried in its walls. I heard the front door open, then the slow, heavy stomp of boots. Derek. I quickly stood, folded the will back into its envelope, and slid it into my pocket. His steps grew louder, moving through the hall toward the kitchen. I didn't move. I didn't speak. As his shadow darkened the doorway, I pressed the will against my chest, knowing this secret could either save me or destroy me. When Derek's shadow stretched across the kitchen floor, I didn't flinch, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I had no room left to be. Fear had worn itself thin inside me, like a rug trampled for years until the pattern faded and only threads remained. He said nothing, just grunted, gestured at the living room, and dropped a folder on the dining table with the kind of carelessness that only comes from knowing you're in control. Behind him, Isolde followed, heels clicking, her phone in one hand, and a thin smile playing at the edge of her mouth. She didn't look at me. Family finance meeting, Derek muttered, like it was a perfectly normal thing to say to someone you'd pushed into a cabinet less than a week ago. I said nothing. I simply walked toward the table, my hand brushing the envelope in my pocket like a reflex. The real will, folded and hidden, was the only thing anchoring me. I sat at the far end of the table. No one offered me a place, but I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. The table had changed since Mom used to run her fingers across it with lemon oil. Now, it was covered with opened envelopes, calculator receipts, and half a pizza box someone hadn't bothered to throw away. There was a spreadsheet printed out with bold red numbers. I didn't need to look at it long to know what it was. The mortgage balance. The same one they kept blaming on me, as if my existence was an overdue bill they couldn't wait to close. Isolde didn't sit. She stood beside Derek's chair, resting her hand lightly on his shoulder like a campaign wife waiting for the camera to flash. Derek cleared his throat. We've made a few decisions. Streamlining. Streamlining what? I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. Our expenses, he said. This house eats more than it gives. Heating's outrageous. Taxes, too. And whose fault is that? Isolde added, her voice clipped. We're the ones paying it. I opened my mouth to remind them that I paid for the electric bill last winter, and that I covered groceries for a month when Derek's so-called investment flopped. But before I could speak, Isolde turned to the others in the room. Our cousin Daniel, who lived 3 towns over and had no idea what went on here. The notary Derek brought Some guy named Joe who smelled like cigars and wore sunglasses indoors. And Mrs. Bramwell, our mother's old friend, who looked deeply uncomfortable and kept rearranging the edge of her scarf. "She's just here to clean," Isolde said, loudly enough to echo. I felt every set of eyes shift. My chair scraped against the floor as I stood slowly. No one said a word. Not a single soul told her to stop. I waited, giving them time to find their voice, to offer me a seat, to say I mattered. None of them did. So I walked out of the room, back straight, face burning. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I just walked down the hallway and stood in the doorway to the kitchen, watching from a distance as they spoke about my home like I was a ghost. They shuffled papers, highlighted figures. They discussed repairs, interest rates, who should take on responsibility moving forward. Derek joked about selling to a developer. Isolde laughed like it was the most obvious solution in the world. Not once did anyone say my name. Not once did anyone ask me what I thought. Later that week, a woman from the community center handed me a folded copy of the Sunday local paper. She smiled warmly, unaware she was passing me a gut punch. "Thought you'd be proud," she said. "You were always such a gifted writer." I looked down. On the front of the lifestyle section was an article titled "Surviving Setbacks: How to Rebuild When Family Lets You Down." The byline, Isolde Carter. My fingers curled around the paper so tightly the edges crumpled. She had taken my essay, one I had submitted in confidence for a workshop, and printed it under her own name. Every word on that page was mine. From the opening line about growing up in a house built by our father's hands, to the closing thought about dignity being the last thing we can protect when everything else is taken. She hadn't even changed the metaphors. I whispered under my breath, "Even my voice they steal." Back home, I didn't bother confronting her. Not yet. Not until I had more than just words. Instead, I pinned the article to my bedroom wall, right next to the photo of Dad standing in the front yard in his work boots, dirt on his jeans, smiling in that tired, proud way he used to after fixing the plumbing or repainting the fence. I looked at that picture, then at the article, then at the reflection of myself in the mirror. They can erase me from their table. They can push my chair away, change the locks, twist my words until they're no longer mine. But they can't change the truth. This house was his, and he named me in his will, the real one, and even if they silenced me in front of the notary, the neighbors, and the town paper, they would not silence me forever. That night, as I stared at the stolen words on the wall, I knew the next betrayal would cut deeper, and I was not wrong. By morning, I still hadn't moved the article from my wall. It stared back at me like a mirror I didn't ask for, warped and cruel. The page fluttered slightly in the breeze from the kitchen window I'd cracked open. It was early spring, and the air outside was still sharp. I hadn't slept much. I'd spent most of the night replaying that finance meeting in my head, hearing Isolde's voice like static. "She's just here to clean." I pulled on a sweatshirt and made my way to the kitchen. The coffee pot was already half empty, Derek's doing, no doubt, and the silence in the house felt forced, like everyone was pretending yesterday didn't happen. I poured the last of it into a mug and turned toward the counter. That's when I saw it. The laptop. Open, waiting, glowing. There was an email on the screen. Subject: Scholarship. Decline. Body: I regret to inform you that due to family obligations, I will not be able to accept the offered scholarship. Thank you for the opportunity. At first, I thought maybe it was a draft, a mistake, something unsent. But then I noticed the cursor blinking at the bottom, and the words above it, cold, neat, and absolutely not mine. Footsteps creaked behind me. "You didn't send it yet?" Isolde's voice was syrupy, like she was talking to a child who didn't know any better. She leaned against the doorframe with a coffee mug in hand, casual as you please. "I didn't write this," I said. "Well, of course not," she replied, waving her hand. "I typed it for you, just needed you to hit send." "I don't want to decline." She sipped her coffee. "Celestine, come on, let's be adults. You think you're going to attend some night classes while this house is falling apart? We can't afford it." "I don't cost you anything." Derek's voice cut in before she could answer. You breathing in this house costs us more than you think." He appeared behind her, arms crossed, face already irritated, as if my resistance was an inconvenience, not a right. "I earned that scholarship," I said. "And what are you gonna do with it?" he barked. "Write poems. That doesn't pay the mortgage." Isolde nodded in agreement. "You think you're the only one with dreams? I could have gone to law school. But I stayed here. I carried this family." I stared at her, words catching in my throat. "I carried you." She raised a brow. "Excuse me?" I didn't blink. "You think I forgot?" The kitchen around us blurred, and suddenly I was 18 again, standing in the middle of the driveway while her ex-boyfriend screamed in her face. He was drunk, wild-eyed, backing her up against the car. She was crying. Frozen. I stepped between them without thinking. He shoved me so hard I hit the concrete, my arm snapping with a sound I can still hear in my nightmares. I never told anyone how long it took to heal, how I couldn't write for months, how I still couldn't stretch my arm fully when it rained. Isolde never said thank you, never brought it up again, and now she called me a debt. "You remember that night, don't you?" I said, my voice low. Her face tightened, just for a second. Then she scoffed. "That was years ago." I looked at the laptop again. The cursor still blinked. Waiting. "I won't send it," I said. "You will," Derek replied, walking closer. "Or we'll send it for you." I looked at him. "You touch that keyboard, and I'll forward the real will to the university. Let them see who really owns this house." That stopped him. Isolde's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't." I let the silence hang. A moment passed. Derek grinned, thin and mean. "You're bluffing. You don't even have it." Another pause. I shrugged. The shift in their body language was subtle, but it was there. They weren't sure. I left the kitchen. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I went to my room, sat down at my desk, and stared at the blank wall for a long time. Then I opened my own email account and typed a new message, not to the scholarship office, but to myself. Subject: "They tried to take this too." Attachment: screenshot of the draft email, time-stamped, just in case. Because the truth was, I had sent the will to a friend. I scanned it and emailed it weeks ago, just in case. And now it was all I had left. I leaned back in my chair, my arm aching. Same spot as the old fracture. Funny how pain likes to settle in the same corners of us, no matter how many times we patch the cracks. That night, I heard laughter in the hallway. Isolde and Derek, wine glasses clinking, murmurs of some inside joke, a shared chuckle echoing like a slap. I closed my door, but the sound seeped in through the walls, sharper than any broken bone, a reminder that the next cut would be merciless. The laughter eventually faded, swallowed by the creaking floorboards and the steady hum of the refrigerator. But I stayed sitting there in the dark, my knees pulled to my chest, the poem still resting on my lap like a weight I couldn't shake. I must have stayed there until nearly dawn, because by the time I moved again, the sky had gone from black to that pale gray that only shows up when the sun hasn't decided whether it's worth rising. I heard the soft groan of the stairs as I stood. I didn't mean to wake her. Mom had been sleeping more than usual, and even when awake, she floated somewhere between here and elsewhere. But something inside me told me it was time. Whether she was lucid or not didn't matter anymore. I just needed to sit with her. I made tea, just hot water and honey, and carried the mug upstairs, one hand bracing the banister. The hallway was quiet. Derek and Isolde were still asleep, thank God. Their door was closed. The house felt temporarily still. Her room smelled like baby powder and old wood. I stepped in quietly, nudging the door open with my elbow. She lay in bed, facing the window, eyes half shut but fluttering. The space around her looked almost sacred. Doilies on the dresser, an old clock that had stopped ticking sometime last week, a folded blanket at her feet that no one had bothered to pull up. I sat beside her, placing the tea on the nightstand, not expecting her to take it. "Hey, Mom," I whispered, reaching for her hand. Her skin was papery, the kind of dry that never really warms up, no matter how many blankets you use. Her fingers twitched in mine. "It's me," I said softly, brushing her knuckles with my thumb. "Celestine." She stirred. Her eyes blinked slowly, as if pulling focus from far away. She opened her mouth, lips dry, cracking slightly. "Isolde," she rasped, barely audible. "Please, forgive Melissa. She's weak." My throat tightened instantly. Melissa. That was the name of her college roommate. From 40 years ago, not me. And yet, somehow, in her confusion, she saw me, not as Celestine, her daughter, but as someone else. And still, even in this haze, her words begged for grace for someone who had wronged her, not the one being wronged. It was worse than being forgotten. It was being rewritten. I didn't correct her. I couldn't. I just sat there, silent, while my heart cracked into pieces small enough to fall between the floorboards. For years, I had done everything to hold this family together, cleaned up their messes, paid what I could, stayed when I should have run. I had buried the things that hurt me most, believing that one day, someone in this house would remember who I really was. But as she squeezed my hand, barely aware, I realized maybe they never knew. Maybe I had always been invisible to them. I stayed by her side for another hour, just watching her breathe. When she finally drifted back into a deeper sleep, I stood and quietly moved to the small drawer by her bed. I hadn't meant to snoop, but I needed to feel like I was still part of her world somehow. Inside, tucked beneath a stack of expired medication guides and receipts for vitamins, was a voice recorder, a tiny one, the kind she used to use to record grocery lists when her arthritis flared up. I took it, not out of malice, but instinct. Later that evening, after dinner, Isolde came into the room holding a neatly folded sheet of paper. She looked pleased with herself, the way she used to when she aced a spelling test in 3rd grade. "I thought this might help her rest," she said, smoothing the paper as she walked past me. "It's from Celestine." My jaw clenched. "What is it?" I asked, though I already knew. Just something heartfelt, something Mom deserved to hear a long time ago. She sat at the edge of the bed, unfolding the page and reading aloud with syrupy tenderness. "Dear Mom, I've caused pain. I've held on to things I shouldn't have. I know I'm not easy to love, but I want you to know I'm sorry. And I hope someday I can earn your forgiveness." My hands balled into fists. She was reading my poem, the one I had written 2 months ago in a workshop, an exercise on grief, not directed at Mom, not even shared publicly. I had printed it once, kept in my journal. How she got it, I still don't know. And now she was feeding it to Mom like a lullaby of fake repentance. Tears welled in Mom's eyes. She reached for Isolde's hand, murmuring, "Thank you, baby." Isolde smiled. My blood boiled. That night, I waited until they'd both gone to sleep. Then I returned to Mom's room, crept to the nightstand, and took the poem back. I held it under the lamp in my own room, my hands shaking, not from fear, but rage so cold it burned. She hadn't just stolen my words. She'd stolen my truth, my voice, my relationship with the one person who still might have remembered me, if only for a moment. I couldn't sleep. Instead, I paced the room, replaying the words Isolde had spoken. Words I had never said, feelings I had never written for Mom. "You can steal my voice," I whispered, "but not my memory, not who I am." I sat down at my desk and opened the tiny recorder I had taken from the drawer earlier. Her voice came through, faint but clear. I signed without knowing. "Forgive me, Celestine. The house should be yours." And just like that, I found it, my anchor, not because it was proof, but because, for once, she had said my name. That night, with her breath shallow down the hall and silence crawling through the walls, I sat in the dark, holding both the recorder and the stolen poem. And when the night grew still, I promised myself, if they pushed again, I would push back. The promise I made to myself that night didn't fade come morning. If anything, it pulsed beneath my skin, louder with each breath. I'd spent so long waiting for someone to protect me. Mom, Isolde, anyone. But now, I knew better. I had to protect myself. The day started slow, the kind of slow that feels like the house is daring you to breathe too loudly. I helped Mom dress for her doctor's appointment, brushing her hair gently as she stared out the window, murmuring things I couldn't quite catch. I buttoned her cardigan, adjusted her scarf, and whispered kind words she didn't seem to hear. Isolde didn't lift a finger. She stayed on her phone until the very last moment, then waltzed in just in time to snap at me for wrinkling Mom's blouse. Derek drove, as always. I sat in the back with Mom, holding her hand as the car rolled through the cracked streets of our neighborhood. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I let her. Even if she mistook me for someone else, even if her memories were scrambled, her touch still meant something. The clinic was a small brick building near the grocery store. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The walls were lined with those boring pamphlets no one ever reads. Understanding blood pressure. Managing stress. Ironic, really. We sat in the waiting room for 20 minutes before the nurse called us in. The exam room was tiny, just enough space for one rolling chair and a single outdated scale. The doctor, a graying man with polite eyes, greeted us and began the checkup, asking routine questions, checking Mom's vitals. Then he looked at me and said gently, "How has her environment at home been? Any unusual stressors?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Isolde beat me to it. "Honestly," she said, her voice smooth as glass, "Mother's been struggling a lot more lately. And Celestine, bless her heart, tends to get emotional. It's hard on Mom, all the tension in the house." My chest tightened. The doctor looked at me with soft concern. "Is that true?" I couldn't speak. The words were caught in my throat like a splinter too deep to remove. I knew if I opened my mouth I might scream instead, so I shook my head slightly, blinking hard to hold back the sting behind my eyes. "She just doesn't cope well," Isolde added. "You know how sensitive she's always been." There it was again. That word, sensitive. They used it like a blade dressed in silk. It wasn't a compliment. It was a judgment. A sentence. A way to undermine everything I felt, everything I knew. The doctor nodded, writing something down in the chart. I sat still, my hands folded tightly in my lap, nails digging into my skin. On the drive home, no one spoke. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the hallway shadows stretched long, I stood at the stove stirring soup. The house was too quiet. Even Mom was asleep early. Then I heard it, Derek slamming a cabinet. The bang echoed. "You left the trash overflowing again," he barked from behind me. I didn't turn around. "I didn't cook anything today." "That's from last night." His footsteps drew closer. "You're saying it was me?" "I'm saying you live here too." He was in my space now, chest puffed, arms crossed. "You don't get to have an attitude, not when you're a freeloader." I turned to face him, calmly. "You know I'm not." He laughed. "You keep telling yourself that." His voice got louder, meaner. He was throwing words now, not just insults but blame, twisting everything wrong in the house into my fault. "You walk around like you own this place," he snapped. "Guess what? You don't. We do. Me and your sister. You're just a guest we haven't kicked out yet." His voice was thunder, but I didn't back down this time. I stepped forward. "If you think scaring me will make me disappear, you're wrong." "You think you matter?" he sneered. "You're background noise." Across the street, in the little yellow house with the blue shutters, Mrs. Johnson sat by her window. She was reading, like she always did after dinner. She heard him, clear as day. She looked up slowly, her hand frozen on the page. She had heard this before, but this time, she didn't go back to her book. She stood, walked to the phone, and picked it up. "If I stay silent," she whispered, "she won't survive." I didn't know this at the time, of course. I only learned it later when she told me. But in that moment, I felt something shift. Like the air outside was different, sharper, watching. Back in the kitchen, Derek grabbed my arm. I yanked back. He grabbed it again, harder. His fingers dug into the same place they always did, where the old bruise still lingered faintly. "You need to learn when to shut your mouth," he hissed. I struggled, pushing against him, and this time I didn't care if I made noise. I wanted noise. I screamed, "Let go of me!" The walls shook. The dog next door started barking. and somewhere in the distance I heard it. Sirens. He froze, but his hand didn't. It stayed locked around my arm, as if he thought pressure could undo the sound of my voice. And as his grip tightened, I prayed the sirens would arrive before his fist did. The sound of sirens grew clearer, crawling closer through the night like salvation and judgment rolled into one. But Derek didn't let go. His hand still gripped my arm with the kind of force that didn't need words anymore. His mouth twisted, breathing hard, spitting out curses under his breath. About me, about this damn house, about how no one listened to him. He paced like a caged animal, back and forth across the kitchen tiles, knocking over a chair, then kicking it aside as if the furniture were to blame for his unraveling. I didn't move, not yet. I couldn't risk it. Not when I finally had the one thing I'd never had before. Proof. Beneath my pillow, tucked safely in the corner of the couch behind me, a red light blinked on a small recorder. A cheap one, bought from a pawn shop 2 weeks ago when I realized words alone wouldn't save me. Not in this house. You know, Derek snarled suddenly, turning back toward me, voice slurred from whatever he'd poured into his coffee earlier. I should have done this a long time ago. He slammed his fist against the cabinet beside my head, not hitting me, not yet, but close enough that dust shook from the shelves. I flinched instinctively, then caught myself. He saw the fear and smiled. That was always his currency. Your sister begged me, he said, pacing again. Begged me to put an end to your little tantrums, said you were holding us back. She was tired of carrying dead weight. I blinked. What? He didn't notice the recorder, didn't care. He kept talking, spitting venom like it cost nothing. I'll finish what your sister asked me to start. There it was. My breath caught, but I didn't react. Not outwardly. My fingers tightened around the throw pillow on my lap. My heart pounded so loudly, I thought for a second he might hear it and realize, but he didn't. He was too busy ranting. She told me you'd pull this, he continued, pacing again. Always the martyr, always the victim. She said if you wouldn't leave on your own, we'd make you. I heard the first chirp of the police radio outside. A car door slammed, then another. For the first time in hours, I felt a flicker of something warm, not safety exactly, but possibility. I stood slowly. He didn't like that. Sit down, he barked, pointing. You don't move until I say so. I didn't respond. My silence was louder than his shouting. My hand reached behind the couch cushion, slipping the recorder deeper into my sleeve. I could feel the corner of the metal edge pressing into my wrist. A few days before this night, when the world still spun slowly and my worst wounds were quiet, I'd received a letter. A real one. Handwritten. No return address. Just a local postmark. It was from Marla Reyes. We hadn't spoken since high school. She'd gone to New York. I'd stayed here. Our lives had diverged before we ever had the chance to talk about real things. But the letter was clear. She'd found an article I wrote, one of the few that had slipped past Isolde's censorship, published anonymously in a tiny community zine. She wrote, "Your words saved me when I was lost. I didn't know how badly I needed to hear them until I did. Don't let them take that voice away from you. You're more than what they say." I'd cried after reading it, not because I was moved, but because I hadn't realized how close I'd come to believing Isolde's version of me, that I was small, weak, a burden. But Marla remembered me, and now someone else would hear the truth. I held on to that letter like a lifeline for the next 2 days, folded it carefully, slipped it into the envelope with my father's original will, and stored both inside a cereal box in my closet, just in case. Tonight, I wasn't just surviving, I was documenting. You think I'm scared of the cops? Derek sneered, stepping closer again. You should be, I said calmly. You're not as smart as you think. He laughed, but it sounded thinner now. His bravado cracked slightly as the knock on the door rattled the frame. Police department, open up! Derek froze. I didn't. Don't, he said, raising a hand like he could still command me. I stepped past him, 1 foot, then another. He grabbed my wrist. Yeah, But this time I didn't freeze. "I have everything," I said, voice steady, eyes locked on his. "Every word you just said. It's all recorded." He blinked. For the first time, he looked unsure. Liar. I lifted my arm, showing the edge of the recorder beneath my sleeve. The red light still blinking. "You think this house belongs to you?" I asked. "You think you can twist the truth long enough until no one knows who built these walls? My father bled for this place, and I bled to stay in it. You're just passing through." He didn't answer. Behind us, the door creaked open. Flashlights swept across the hallway. 2 officers stepped in, young but wide-eyed. They saw me first, bruised, pale, shaking, but standing. Then they saw Derek, fists clenched. "Sir," one of them said sharply, "step back from her now." He did, slowly. Only then did I exhale. I didn't cry. Not yet. One officer guided me toward the living room, while the other stayed with Derek. I handed over the recorder, watched their expressions shift as they listened. "Did you say your sister asked him to?" "Yes," I said. "I have proof. Her words, too. I kept emails, messages. It's all backed up." The officer nodded. My voice didn't tremble. Later, after the chaos had quieted, I sat in my room holding Marla's letter again. The hallway was quiet now. Only the ticking of the old hallway clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator remained. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, the silence didn't suffocate me. It steadied me. And as the sirens grew louder, I clenched the recorder, knowing the truth it held could either damn me or finally set me free. The flash of red and blue lights leaked through the kitchen window just as Derek's shout broke into a guttural roar. He lunged. The sound of his boots scraped hard against the linoleum, and I knew this was it, the moment everything would either splinter or finally be heard. I ducked, not fast enough. His fist caught the side of my face, and I stumbled backward, my shoulder catching the corner of the counter. The pain was immediate, white-hot, but what terrified me more was the silence that followed. No more yelling, no more footsteps, just my own breath and the crackling hum of the fridge. Then came the ringing in my ears. I hit the floor hard, the back of my head grazing the tile. My cheek throbbed. Something wet trickled down my temple. I tasted iron. Somewhere behind me, glass shattered. I turned slightly and saw a plate on the floor, broken into 5 or 6 jagged pieces. My arm landed beside it, shaking, still gripping the recorder I'd pulled from under the pillow when he wasn't looking. The blood smeared across the white tile, spreading beneath me. Outside, I heard pounding, loud, urgent. A woman's voice yelling, "Open the damn door! We've called the police!" Then a man's voice. "Step back, ma'am. We've got it." The front door burst open. I didn't see it, but I felt the tremor of it echo through the foundation. Heavy boots rushed in. Flashlights darted across the walls. "Hands where we can see them!" "Sir, step away from her!" Derek froze. I saw his eyes shift. Not fear exactly, but calculation. That old instinct of his, lie, blame, twist it back. But this time, he didn't speak. He raised his hands slowly and turned toward the sound of the officers, his voice low and oily. "This is a misunderstanding. She fell. She's fragile." "Shut up," I mumbled, voice barely more than a breath. One officer knelt beside me. "Ma'am, are you able to speak? Can you move?" I nodded once, then raised the recorder. The blinking red light still pulsed. I placed it in his hand, weak but certain. "Listen, it's all in there." He exchanged a look with his partner. They stepped aside briefly to play the tape. Derek's voice spilled into the room, clear, unfiltered, recorded just minutes before. "I'll finish what your sister asked me to start." Gasps. Not from me. I'd already heard it, already lived it. But the others, Mrs. Johnson, standing in the doorway in her nightgown, arms crossed. One of the younger neighbors from across the street, still in his slippers. Even the rookie cop. They heard it. They heard him. Another officer, older and more seasoned, stepped forward. "Cuff him." Derek didn't protest. That might have been the most surprising part of the night. As they read him his rights, I looked past them to where Isolde stood at the end of the hallway. She was pale, her lips pressed together, arms crossed so tightly across her chest, it looked like she was holding herself together by force. She didn't speak, not once, not even when they walked him out in handcuffs. Instead, she walked over to me after they'd cleared the room, crouched next to the pool of blood that had now dried tacky against the floor. "I didn't tell him to hurt you," she said, voice thin. I looked up slowly, the side of my face throbbing. "You didn't have to," I whispered. "You just let him." Her eyes flashed. "Don't act like you've been innocent in all this. You've always needed someone to blame when life didn't go your way." My laugh was bitter. "You stole my voice, my words, our father's house." She stood. "You always thought you were better than me," she said, venom barely held back. "Always the quiet one, the noble one." "But you're just as broken." I didn't argue. I didn't have to. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a second recorder, the one with Mom's voice. I pressed play, the soft crackle of age, then my mother's voice. "The house is for Celestine. She is the one." Isolde froze. Her chin trembled, just for a moment. Then she turned on her heel and walked away. I didn't watch her go. I let the officers tend to my injuries. They brought me a blanket, asked if I needed an ambulance. I said no, not because I wasn't hurt, because I was, but because I needed to stay. I needed to sit in that kitchen and feel the ground beneath me, and know, for once, I wasn't the only one who knew the truth. "Mrs. Johnson stepped inside, placing a shaky hand on my shoulder. "You held out longer than most would have," she said softly. "You didn't deserve any of this." I nodded. "I stayed because I loved them," I whispered. She nodded too. "And now, you leave because you love yourself." But I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I still had one more battle ahead. One more war, not of fists, but of records and signatures and cold, deliberate truth. I knew that when Isolde looked back over her shoulder, whispering just loud enough for me to hear, "This isn't over." Her words seared through the haze of pain, and I knew the final battle would not be fought with fists, but in the courtroom. The courthouse smelled like old paper and stronger coffee than anyone should drink. It had that sterile coldness you can't quite put your finger on, like justice tried to live there but hadn't made herself at home. I sat on the hard bench outside courtroom 3B, a folder in my lap. My hands trembled slightly as I traced the edge of it over and over again. Inside were bruises, not literal this time, but photos of them, time-stamped, documented, cataloged, hospital reports, copies of emails. My mother's recorded voice, soft and apologetic, like she had finally remembered who I was, even if only in the end. And the deed, my father's original will. I looked around. People came and went, some nervous, some resigned, some irritated about parking. But for me, time moved thickly, like syrup in cold weather. I had waited years for this day, and now that it was here, I couldn't quite believe it had come. The bailiff opened the door. "Carter case, you're up." I stood, legs aching from stillness, and walked in. Derek was already seated at the defense table, shackled, wearing a county-issued suit that didn't quite fit. His hair had grown out in tufts, gray starting to show. He looked up as I entered, smirking. He didn't scare me anymore. Isolde sat beside him, free but smaller than I remembered. Her hair was pulled back tight, and her blouse looked too clean, too stiff. She didn't meet my eyes. The prosecutor opened with the basics: assault, coercion, documented abuse, falsified inheritance documents. Everything laid bare. They brought up the recording, played the part where Derek said, "I'll finish what your sister asked me to start." You could have heard a pin drop. Even the judge leaned forward. Then came my mother's voice, played gently, slowly. "The house is for Celestine. She is the one." Isolde twitched, barely. But I saw it. She hadn't expected me to keep that recording. She hadn't expected me to have anything left. When the defense took their turn, it was the usual. Derek claimed alcohol, stress, miscommunication, that I had provoked him, that I was never stable, a phrase I'd come to loathe. Isolde took the stand. She spoke in that same measured tone she used when talking to bank tellers or our old pastor, just enough vulnerability to seem sympathetic, just enough distance to stay clean. I tried to help her, she said, but Celestine always believed she was owed something. She was never willing to contribute, and we did what we could to maintain the home after our father's death. She twisted our intentions. I sat still, didn't flinch. When it was my turn, I stood. My hands no longer trembled. I never wanted anything more than to stay in the home my father built, I said. I paid what I could, when I could. I cleaned, I cooked, I cared for our mother. And when I wrote to heal, not to hurt. I looked at the jury. But when someone decides you're a burden, they don't stop until you believe it too. I almost did, but then someone told me my words saved them. And that reminded me, I'm not invisible, not even in my own story. The judge listened. The attorneys asked questions. The hours passed. Then the gavel came down. Derek, guilty, aggravated assault, coercion, sentenced. Isolde, found complicit in inheritance fraud, stripped of any legal claim to the Carter property, barred from further contact. The house, legally and irrevocably mine. When I stepped outside, the sun had already begun to set. The concrete steps felt different under my feet, solid in a way they hadn't for years. Reporters stood nearby, asking questions I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Isolde waited near the sidewalk, alone. She looked at me, eyes hollow but still burning. "You'll always be the weak one," she muttered, too low for anyone else to hear. I didn't reply. I turned, and my silence was louder than any insult she could throw. Weeks later, I returned to the house. No more yelling, no more slamming doors. Just quiet. I unpacked the yellow curtains from the box where I had hidden them years ago. They were wrinkled, a little faded, but still whole. I ironed them carefully, then hung them in the kitchen window, the one that overlooked the front porch, where Dad used to sit after work with a beer and his silence. The first morning light streamed through them like honey. I didn't cry. I just stood there, letting it soak into my skin. Soon, I opened the living room for something new. A writing group. Just 5 women at first. Each had their own story. Each brought pain into the room like folded letters, hesitant to be read. We sat in a circle with coffee mugs and notebooks. We talked. We listened. One night, after the others had left, one woman stayed behind. She had barely spoken in 3 sessions. But as she stood to go, she touched my shoulder and said, "Your story kept me alive tonight." That night, I realized my scars had become a map for someone else. The house had been a battleground, a prison, a shrine. Now, it was a place where truth echoed louder than shame. At dusk, I walked through it slowly, barefoot, the floor cool beneath me. I passed by the photograph of my parents. The scar on my cheek had healed, but I could still feel it sometimes. I opened the front door, let the breeze in. And as the yellow curtains swayed in the evening light, I finally understood. Surviving was not weakness. It was the proof that I was never just a debt, but the soul of this house, alive again. What would you do if the people meant to protect you became the ones tearing you down? This story wasn't just about stolen property. It was about reclaiming voice, identity, and the right to be seen. Sometimes, surviving means standing alone. And sometimes, it means proving that love without respect is just another form of control. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect your peace? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true emotional stories that hit close to home.